Hi everyone! Today we're talking about two types that sometimes are confused in the community due to several shared characteristics, and these are INFJ and INTP. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Before I go into the specifics of this video, I would like to remind you guys that I also offer coaching sessions for personal development, not necessarily just MBTI focused, but with a general focus on self-discovery and self-awareness, using a variety of tools such as MBTI, Enneagram, but also other things like communication styles, relationship focus, conflict management, and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in finding out more or working with me, feel free to check out the link in the description. So now, getting back to business, INFJ and INTP, what are the differences between these two types? So obviously we have two individuals who are both introverted and intuitive, something they share, and we also have individuals who have introverted thinking and extroverted feeling in their main four cognitive functions. However, there are also several really important differences that I would like to mention. So the first one is the extroverted feeling preference, okay? INFJs have extroverted feeling as one of their most obvious functions, as their second function, the parent function. Whereas INTPs have extroverted feeling as their fourth or inferior function. And we can notice a pretty, let's say, obvious difference between extroverted feeling parent and extroverted feeling inferior. On the one hand, extroverted feeling parent is a function that INFJ is more comfortable with, a function that is, let's say, more frequently shown by this type. In general, the parent function is a function that we use a lot and we make it quite obvious to other people. So the INFJ will have this tendency to easily understand what the emotional atmosphere is, what other people feel, what is the emotionally appropriate response in a specific situation, in a specific context. And this type will have more ease into even expressing how they feel or expressing the emotional content that they perceive in a specific situation. On the other hand, INTPs have extroverted feeling as an inferior function. This obviously means that this function is not something that we will see all the time. Of course, the INTP uses it and we can see it, but it's not as frequently used. It's not as confident, maybe, as the parent function is in an INFJ or an ISFJ for that matter. So when it comes to this particular function, as in an inferior position, in a fourth position, we will notice that it can create more stress and anxiety for the INTP, because the inferior function is often associated with something that stresses us, something that causes more pressure, more tension within ourselves. And for the INTP, this means feeling like they do want to help other people. They do want to have a contribution to a positive emotional impact in others, especially people that they really care about, friends and family and so on. But they might be a little bit unsure about how to tackle this. And because of this, let's say, insecurity with respect to this topic, they might feel a lot of anxiety coming from the need to consider what to do about other people's emotions or what to do with respect to the emotional atmosphere of a specific context. They might notice it, they might pick up on it, but they might feel a little bit confused as to, okay, what do I do now? How do I use this? Also, having to engage in a lot of emotionally expressive conversations might exhaust the INTP. They might want to do it, but for a shorter period of time, and then they might need a little bit more time as compared to the INFJ to kind of focus on, other things, or being alone, or having a more logical, analytical conversation, which might come more naturally to them. Okay, so this was the extroverted feeling component. And of course, I would like to link this to the introverted thinking part as well, because again, this is a function that both INFJ and INTPs use, but it is in different positions and it has a different, let's say, expression into the world. For INFJ, introverted thinking is their tertiary or child function, whereas for the INTP, introverted thinking is their hero or dominant function. So Because of that, I'm going to start with INTP here. Introverted thinking hero is the function that will be the most obvious in an INTP, okay? Because it's their hero function, it's their dominant function, it's the function they use with most ease, the function that comes most naturally to them, and the function that is most frequently used as compared to all of the other ones. So an INTP will be usually more analytical as compared to an INFJ. The INFJ will also be analytical, but we will see this in a more enhanced manner in an INTP. Also, using this function as a hero function makes the INTP quite good at categorical thinking, quite good at breaking down concepts, ideas, information into logical categories that they can kind of put together in order to understand the whole system. And this is something that INTPs naturally do. We notice it in their interests, we notice it in their language, and it doesn't always have to be, this mathematical, logical analysis of something, because this is often a stereotype that people associate with INTPs. This introverted thinking framework or model can really be related to a lot of different things. It could be, an interest in the human body and how it works. It could be an interest in computer science. It could be an interest in, what the little pieces that create a robot or any sort of object are and how they work together. Or it can be something much more abstract, like the basics of MBTI or Enneagram or any other theory that they might be interested in kind of putting the pieces together. Now, the INFJ will also have a tendency towards this direction, and the INFJ will also want to kind of categorize and logically understand these frameworks and systems, but this function will not be as frequently used as compared to the ENTPs. I don't want to say not as obvious because the child function sometimes is quite loud and it wants to kind of brag about its conclusions. Or the child archetype in itself tends to be a bit more expressive. But regardless of that, this tertiary function will still not be the most comfortable or the most natural function to use. The INFJ will use it, the INFJ will tap into this function, but definitely not as much as the INTP. So what we will see here is a tendency to play around with categories, with structures, with logical frameworks of how things work, and understanding the basic principles that certain things or theories are based upon. But the most, let's say, obvious or notable difference here is that the INFJ will do this in a relaxed space. They might sometimes struggle to engage in this very logical, analytical conversations because they might feel a bit confused at some point, or they might feel like they need a little bit more time to process all of these things and conclusions. Whereas the INTP will be a bit faster into finding these underlying principles and understanding how they work. Also, an INTP is more likely to trust the input that is coming from their introverted thinking as compared to the INFJ, who, when tired, is much more likely to just engage with their extroverted feeling and introverted intuition instead. Okay, now I also want to look at the different types of intuition that INFJs and INTPs use. INFJs are an introverted intuitive type, whereas ENTPs are an extroverted intuitive type. I made a video where I compare these two functions, so feel free to check that out for more in-depth descriptions. However, the main idea that I want to point out here is the different type of, let's say, perception that these different types of intuitions handle or deal with. Introverted intuition is much more likely to have several inputs that it brings together into one single coherent conclusion. Introverted intuition is much more likely to look at several different ideas, several different perspectives, and kind of create something new, create a new idea or have a new insight that comes from all of this input, all of these different, pieces of ideas or perspectives or angles. Introverted intuition is also more likely to look into the future and try to anticipate what is going to happen. Like John Beebe was describing this function using the word knowing and divining. I think this is a very good way to put it, because after analyzing and kind of putting together all of these ideas, introverted intuition has the ability to project this into the future, envision what it's going to happen, and trust this process. On the other hand, extroverted intuition has a bit of a different approach. Rather than bringing ideas together, extroverted intuition likes to split ideas into many different directions. So an INTP in this case will be more likely to want to look at one idea from many different angles, to want to kind of spread it into many different directions and say, okay, you gave me this idea, you gave me this angle, you gave me this perception, but how about this? How about that? Have you considered this angle? Have you considered this idea? What if this means this? What if this means that? And so on and so forth. And this is something that also reflects in communication style or language, because the INFJ will communicate in a much more direct fashion, whereas INTPs in a more informative fashion. I'm linking this to the interaction styles, the theory created by Linda Burns, where INFJs are included in the direct communication group, whereas INTPs are included in the informative communication group. This means that the INFJ tends to give more direct answers to questions, not in the sense that they can't be vague, but more in the sense that if you ask them something, they're more likely to give you the answer to that question without giving you a lot of background context or detail that you did not ask for. Or they might have shorter answers, or they might have an answer that kind of summarizes points, whereas the INTP is more likely to give you more detail and more context, because they feel like other people need to have that information in order to really understand the main idea or the answer that they're giving. So from that perspective, we notice this difference between the two types. Now, the interaction style theory also splits these two types into different categories. The INFJ is a finisher type, or a chart the course type, whereas INTP is a behind the scenes type. So for the INFJ, we will notice a tendency to want to take things to completion. INFJs might be a little bit more reluctant at the beginning when, a new project is suggested or a new thing to do is suggested, until they decide whether that is something they really want to commit to. And once they commit to it, they will really focus on that long-term goal that is very important to them. And they want to push and keep things on track to make sure that they get to that result. INTPs are part of the behind-the-scenes group, which means they're less likely to focus so much on a specific goal or a specific long-term plan, but more so they are interested in kind of, the way I like to imagine this is kind of like planting seeds and trusting the process of turning those seeds into beautiful resources, of beautiful results in the future. Believing that the more you learn, the more you know, the more you do, something good will happen in the future. And again, they are less likely to be focused on specific goals or results into the future. So these are the main points that I wanted to compare and contrast between these two types. We looked at extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, we looked at extroverted intuition, introverted intuition, and we looked at communication styles and interaction styles. So what else have you noticed about these two types? What else do you feel like adding when it comes to a discussion that analyzes these two and the differences between them? Feel free to share your comments below. As always, thanks a lot for watching, thanks a lot for being with me, and see you next week with another video on typology.